Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our May 2025 edition of Streets for All Happy Hour. We're very excited to have Marissa Roy, who's a candidate running for city attorney in the city of Los Angeles, with us as our special guest. Before we get to our conversation with Marissa, we're going to give you I'm hearing some feedback. Can you please mute yourself? We're going to give you an update on our efforts in Sacramento, an update on the city of LA's budget, as well as measure HLA, and we have a number of wins and fails to go over. Our icebreaker this month, and Marissa, you're also welcome to answer this when we get to you, is what are you hopeful about right now in the city of Los Angeles? I think we could all use a little bit of hope. So I'm going to start giving the state team update. You know, I was really pessimistic with the budget, and I now have hope because we went from having mass layoffs and just destruction across DOT, Streets LA, and BOE, the agencies we need to do our work. Thanks to the work of Katie Yaroslawski and Mrs. Hernandez and others on the budget committee, we now have no layoffs in those departments. And that's a really big deal. And so we've worked really hard to get those members of city council elected, and I feel like it's paying off. So that gave me hope. Quick update from Sacramento. Every one of our bills passed its first policy committee. So we have no dead bills yet, hopefully none, but we have nothing yet. And they're now going to the first House Fiscal Committee, or the Appropriations Committee. These are our 9 sponsored bills this year. You can dig into them at streetsforall.org/state. SB 79, I want to point out, has been especially controversial, probably because it's especially impactful for transit-oriented housing. We had to roll 2 committee chairs, which is very unheard of and unusual, but it continues to move forward, and it would be very, very impactful in the city of Los Angeles if it passed. On to the budget. So just for context setting, we told you guys before that we sent a coalition budget letter that was sent prior to the mayor's budget coming out on April 20th, about a month ago. And it was asking to preserve and invest in our streets, our sidewalks, and multimodal transportation. The mayor's budget didn't do any of that. It was a complete disaster. If the budget had gone through as she originally envisioned, our sidewalks would have gotten worse, our streets would have gotten worse, new projects wouldn't have happened. It was basically a no-build budget. And DOT and Streets LA were some of the worst hit departments. And all of this, of course, in the context of hosting the World Cup and the Olympics soon. So it was really bad news. I wrote an op-ed in the Times, and the headline basically said it all. Like, the mayor's budget would have made our streets much worse. Well, as I just mentioned, there's a revised budget out, came out last Friday after the rack-up, and it is much, much better. The city overall went from 1,600 layoffs to only 600, and LADOT, Streets LA, and BOE now have no layoffs, and previously they were very impacted. There's now more money for curb ramps for Streets LA at the expense of repaving fewer miles of streets, but that's a good trade-off because without putting in the curb ramps, we couldn't put in things like bike lanes in coordination with Streets LA. So we're kind of right-sizing that. The biggest change I'm excited about is kind of in the weeds and kind of nerdy, but for the first time, the CAO is allowing grant funds and special funds to fund positions. That's a really big deal. The city's general fund is broke, but we have Measure M, SB1, Prop A, et cetera. A lot of special funds that can only be used for transportation. And so it's a really big deal that we can now tap that money for DOT and other departments to actually effectuate the projects. Over to Josh to talk about Measure HLA.
Thanks, Michael. The thing that I'm probably most optimistic about or excited about happening soon in LA is the D-Lane extension opening. I think people are really underestimating how much that's going to shrink Los Angeles. And we really haven't had a transit expansion like it in 20 or 30 years. I live in Koreatown, so it's certainly going to make a really big impact to how easy it is for me to get around the city. I'm going to give a quick update on Measure HLA. So it's been a few months and a year past when this is passed. It's a confusing sentence, but the city has finally moved its draft implementation ordinance. They've handed it back to the city attorney. It'll probably be in their hands for another month or two. We're hopeful that it'll be fully complete sometime in August. And, it's pretty good. Most of our amendments went through in it. And we're just excited that the city can really, dig into the work and get started on improving our streets. The city has also launched its dashboard. This is something that they had to do in accordance with the measure. They had 1 year to do it. The city launched it on time, which is great. But there's a lot of issues with it. It's missing projects. It has incomplete data. And we sent a very kind letter to the city asking for some cleanup there. And hopefully that doesn't need to turn into a lawsuit. There is a different lawsuit that is happening. If you go to the next slide. Joe Linton of Streets Blog LA fame has sued the city over compliance on Vermont, where Metro and the city are not working to put in bike lanes and some pedestrian improvements, even though it is quite literally in most years the single most dangerous street in the city of Los Angeles. We're also tracking potential violations on Slauson, and we're holding the city's feet to the fire. Next, I'm going to go over some quick wins and fails of the month. First, North Hollywood to Pasadena BRT. There was a small section of bus lane in Burbank that the city council has struggled to approve. Metro is still moving forward, like they're going to install this small section of dedicated busway. We're optimistic that the city council will move to fully approve it, but it is yet to happen. We'll keep you guys up to date with that. Next, we have released some really exciting research around SB 79 and land use. The data team at Streets for All took a look at residential zoning and how it relates to property tax values and property tax income that the city gets. This came away with some big takeaways, including that between 250 million and nearly $1 billion could be added to the city budget if these properties that are rezoned or redeveloped. If you want to learn more, you can go to data.streetsforall.org. Next, we had some good wins on the neighborhood council side. Region 5 winners in Hollywood Hills, Mid-City West, Pico. And the next elections that are upcoming are in the Valley. So if you live in the Valley, you can check it out on our website, on our initiatives page, and request a ballot and vote. And please let us know if you're running so that we can look to endorse you. Next, I'm going to pass it back to Michael.
Thanks, Josh. We're really excited about an HLA-style ordinance for LA County. Today, the Community Services Cluster at the Board of Supervisors met to advance it to the full Board of Supervisors agenda. That will be June 2nd or 3rd. I'm blanking on the exact date, but we'll let you know. Shout out to Supervisor Horvath and Solis for championing this. This would apply to unincorporated sections of LA County, like Marina del Rey and East Los Angeles. But more importantly, it would set an example. We're the most populous county in the country. Having an HLA-style ordinance would advance the bike master plan and county's Vision Zero efforts. It would also save money. And we would be surrounding every other city in LA County with HLA-style treatment. So we're really excited about this one. We also want to give a shout out to Councilmember Yaroslavsky. We have an initiative called Westwood Connected that calls for, among other things, unlocking the pedestrian gate at Constitution Avenue that was locked after 9/11. And it is really the only safe way to get between UCLA and areas west of the 405 walking or on a bike. Everything else is way out of your way, very hilly or dangerous. So we're thankful to the council member for asking the National Cemetery Administration to unlock this gate, and we're looking forward to results. Lastly, unfortunately, Fountain Avenue continues to be just this killer highway. In the 1960s, LA County, it was a nice tree-lined street with one lane each direction. LA County, before it became West Hollywood, went in and widened it. They shaved the sidewalks. It's a horrible pedestrian experience. It's now really dangerous. The West Hollywood City Council approved a protected bike lane, I want to say 2.5 years ago now. It is still not on the ground, and unfortunately, Fountain continues to claim lives. I think this is the 3rd death on Fountain in the last 2.5 years since that was approved. So we really need to see that in the ground. As always, check out a membership program. We're constantly adding perks. We just had a members event. We're going to have another one soon, streetsfile.org/members. And I am very excited to introduce now Marissa Roy. So Marissa is running for LA City Attorney. She does consumer protection work at the California Department of Justice, working on the tenants' rights team to investigate violations of state housing law. She wants to realize the city attorney's office potential to work in the public interest. And we want to know a bit more about what that means. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh to ask the first question and give us some context.
Cool. So this is a little bit of a softball, but I think a lot of people don't know what the city attorney does. Some people might be surprised that we have a candidate for city attorney as a guest. And so I'm just kind of hoping you can give some context to the audience. Why does it matter who the city attorney is, and why is it relevant for things like transportation and land use? And also, if you want to answer the icebreaker about what you're most excited for in Los Angeles, or what makes you feel optimistic, please go ahead.
I think I can bundle it all into one answer. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm, as mentioned, Marissa Roy, she, her pronouns, and I'm running for city attorney. And really, I think as I explain what the city attorney does, it hopefully will show a lot of why I believe so much in this position. I always kind of like to joke that the city attorney is one of the most important, least understood positions in the city. Any issue that you care about, the city attorney's office has a nexus to. So the city attorney is the city's lawyer, oversees a department of 500 attorneys and about 500 additional like support staff and investigators, and is really involved in everything that the city does. And so with kind of the city hat on, I'm going to talk about this a little bit like a lawyer. There are many clients of the city attorney, and so we'll start with kind of like the municipal one. That is the function where the city attorney writes ordinances, like ones that have been passed by ballot measure, like Healthy Streets LA, or even before when there was the implementation of the mobility plan. Those drafts come from the city attorney's office. So we do all this work at the city council to, I think there's usually a lot of group investment in making sure that the ordinance language is really, that the motion language is really strong, but then it's the city attorney who actually writes the ordinance. And sometimes it doesn't always match up to the intent of the motion or ballot initiative. So that's one thing the city attorney does. The city attorney also is involved in advising all of the city departments on legal issues and complying with state, federal, and local law, and then defending those departments if they are ever sued. And then there's kind of the other hat the city attorney wears, which is the hat I've been wearing essentially my entire career, and that is the hat of the people, working for the people. So a lot of people don't know this, but the city attorney, any city attorney in California in a city over 750,000 can sue any business for anything unlawful, unfair, or deceptive. And there are some cities that have a lot of fun with that go after wage theft, that go after slumlords and abusive landlords, that go after corporate polluters, that sue the Trump administration. Our city attorney doesn't do that work. You can see kind of old LA Times articles saying that the city attorney has kind of an informal rule against suing corporations. And, we're the capital of wage theft, and there's only been a couple of wage theft actions in the last year or so. My track record is when I was in the city attorney's office, I brought some very large scale wage theft cases, misclassification of port trucking drivers who were having hundreds of thousands deducted from their wages, suing the Trump administration as outside counsel for LA County, and then now at the state, suing abusive landlords, and also some of the biggest tech companies in the world. And so I really want to bring a more public interest focus to the city attorney's office, for it to be the largest public interest law office in the city. And I think when I have the municipal hat on, also thinking about how the city attorney's office acts as a problem solver instead of an obstructionist. I think we have seen many of what I would just call the sort of like administrative duties of the city attorney's office politicized in the past couple of years when this city attorney has disagreed with a project or disagreed with an ordinance. And I think the way that that intersects with transportation, unfortunately, is having a city attorney who is hostile to a lot of the, pedestrian safety initiatives, bike lane initiatives that have been increasingly embraced by voters. The delays in implementing the Healthy Streets LA, implementing ordinance, and then kind of the disloyalty of the proposed language to the initiative kind of shows the city attorney inserting herself to the detriment, frankly, of the public instead of following the public's instruction and writing the law that was asked. And I think that it has really deep implications for liability and the health of the city. Like I know this stat has been shared by Healthy Streets LA that over 200 people have been killed since the election and the adoption of that ballot measure as we keep seeing all of these delays in implementation. And not only is that just unacceptable from a human point of view, it's also a large part of how we end up in this liability crisis when the city is not making the infrastructure improvements that it needs to. Then we get sued, we pay out liability, and then it impacts the budget. And unfortunately, the horrible cycle that I hope we don't get in is it's just short-sighted to cut positions to the Department of Transportation or engineering or sanitation, because then you're still not going to make the infrastructure changes that are needed. There's going to be more liability, and we just end up in a spiral. And so the city attorney has a really important role to play in sort of managing liability so it doesn't take over the budget, has a role to play in terms of writing ordinances that are loyal to what council or the people passed, and then also making sure you're bringing litigation that serve the people first and foremost. So those are kind of like the basic overview jobs of the city attorney. And I think one of the things I'm most hopeful about are all of the opportunities we have for this office to really serve the public.
Thanks, Marissa. You answered a lot of this, but I just want to elaborate on it a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about your background, why you think you're a good fit for the city attorney of Los Angeles? Can you talk about your platform and what you'd focus on? How would LA be different under your leadership compared to what we have right now?
Yeah, so I view this position in, I think, a deeply personal way. Before I was ever an attorney, I was a really protective older sister. My younger brother, Austin, is gay. And when Proposition 8, for those of you who grew up in California, when Proposition 8 was passed, taking away, gay marriage, I had grown up in elementary school defending my brother against bullies who said he was not a normal boy. Or teachers who treated him differently. And then to have my whole state vote to take away his future, like, I've just never felt more helpless. And it was the San Francisco city attorney that sued and got Prop 8 overturned. And that was the whole reason I became a lawyer. And when I was at law school, I worked directly with the San Francisco city attorney, and they were the ones who helped kind of expand and give me this whole idea of what a city attorney's office could do when it worked in the public interest. So my first job I mentioned when I was at the LA City Attorney's Office was coming up with lawsuits in the public interest. So not just the misclassification suit, but other wage theft actions too. And I in particular focused on wage theft because 2.5 billion are stolen from workers every year. It's predominantly and often immigrant workers who can't bring these lawsuits on their own for fear of, retaliation and immigration consequences. And so it meant something that the city attorney was bringing that lawsuit when they couldn't, and that it was the people of the state of California and no one had to put their name on it. And as the Trump administration rose, as I mentioned, went to work as outside counsel for LA County, and our team handled all of their litigation against the Trump administration. So around the rescission of DACA, around attempts to defund sanctuary cities. And I'm really proud to say that we won against every single attempt to try to defund LA for being a sanctuary city. And so I think I look at the threats now and know that it's possible to fight the administration if you have the courage to do so. And after that, I ended up representing cities kind of all across the country. Cities in Florida suing Ron DeSantis, and we won. Cities in Arizona and in Michigan that were fighting for reproductive rights after Roe fell, and fighting those pre-Roe abortion bans, and we won in Michigan. And then, fighting for voting rights in Alabama. And I kind of missed home though. And so worked and I came back to work at the California Department of Justice, which of course I have to disclaimer and say I'm obviously not representing the department right now. But yeah, have been suing Meta around basically arguing that they crafted the apps to induce compulsive use and trying to recover for the mental health harms they've caused children. And then, yeah, investigating violations of housing law. So all this to say, I've had the opportunity representing, the city, the county, the state, to touch so many different areas of law. But I still see a family behind every lawsuit. Like as someone who's been on the other side, who was protected when no one else was standing up, for my family, like I see the importance of this office really taking a public interest focus. And to me, it's unacceptable that there have been barely any wage theft claims filed in the last 2 years. It's unacceptable that 13,000 complaints of tenant harassment have been filed and there have been 0 city attorney cases. It's unacceptable that the city attorney has not joined a single lawsuit against the Trump administration. When cities across the country, San Diego, Santa Clara, Sacramento, San Francisco, of course, are all in this fight. And when we need to be in this fight. And so I think that has just been extraordinarily difficult to see, because I think this office could be doing so much more. And a lot of my platform is aimed at realizing the potential of that office. So I would like to see us dramatically scale up what's called kind of our affirmative litigation. That's the public interest litigation, so that we are dramatically doing workers' rights, and we're bringing tenants' rights cases. We're fighting corporate pollution. We're fighting the Trump administration. I want people to feel like they have aligned the city attorney's office. There used to be, deputies that were really involved in neighborhoods, that were at neighborhood councils, that were at schools. They were pulled out by this current city attorney. So trying to put them back in neighborhoods, so that we're able to get a pipeline and get information, and people can feel like they have aligned to the city attorney's office. Because too often complaints that are actually legal complaints, like a false eviction notice, get to the city council, but don't have a way of finding their way to the city attorney's office. And then I think kind of on the transportation issues, and particularly projects, I think we've seen this, as I mentioned, the city attorney obstruct projects, obstruct Healthy Streets LA, obstruct Venice Dell, which was an affordable housing project in Venice, just because of personal disagreements, disagreements from when she was on the neighborhood council and opposed bike lanes, or wrote public comments against the Venice Dell project. And my view is that, I understand she didn't represent, she's not been a litigator, has never represented government, and doesn't necessarily understand, I think, the import of that oath you take as an attorney. But you need to be listening to your client. And when your client approves a project, when your client votes a ballot measure, your job is not to rewrite it. Your job is not to impose your will or to be the 16th council member. It is to implement that ordinance and make sure that you are not getting in the way of it. So I think there's an aspect of, like, what I would like to do is, I appreciate where I do have discretion and where the city attorney doesn't, and to make the city attorney's office into one that is, facilitating and acting competently, but then also is really maximizing the public interest work we can do.
Amazing.
Thank you. Josh.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in, and this question is about something that you briefly mentioned, but Venice Dell is an affordable housing project. It's 100% deed affordable housing. It's about 100 units, and it's really close to the beach in Venice. And Tracy Park, the council member of that district, along with Heidi, the current city attorney, have been interfering and have pretty much been trying to kill this project. The LA Times has called it in development hell since 2017. And it's right now it's just a city-owned parking lot. And the housing project would actually replace more parking spots than would actually be taken up by the housing project. Heidi is against the project and has been throwing up roadblock after roadblock. Why does the city attorney have so much power to change things based on their personal preference, whether it's bike lanes or housing projects like this? Again, you kind of referenced this.
I'll be honest, I don't think the city attorney does have that power. I think that we are seeing an abuse of power right now. So the Venice-style project went through 16 public, I believe it was 16, maybe 18, 16 to 18, I'll hedge, public meetings, was approved by council twice, and the Coastal Commission approved it. And it was something that prior to her election, in her personal capacity, which in her personal capacity she's allowed to do, she wrote letters opposing the project, and mentioned it throughout the campaign. The thing is, when you are an attorney, though, and your client in this, this context, the city council, approves something, your job as the attorney is not to go over the head of your client, is not to revise your client's judgment, it's to carry out what your client has instructed you to do. And I think by obstructing the project, and asserting her own viewpoints and judgment, she has violated that duty to your client. So I don't think that the city attorney has that power, but I think that we are seeing kind of like, it's an actually interesting analogy to the federal government, where these are not the rules of the game, but we're also seeing how fragile our system is when people decide to disregard the rules, and how few opportunities there are actually to hold people accountable. And so I think that this is a violation of the duty to the client. I don't think the city attorney has the power to insert herself over counsel, and over her client. But we've had a city attorney who has disregarded that. And that's also why there's been a lawsuit against the city attorney. And we've already spent $600,000 defending that lawsuit, and fighting this affordable housing project that, as you mentioned, would not only add housing units, but would add parking, would add like a docking station at the Venice Canal, would beautify the area more so than certainly an empty parking lot. And so it's brought on liability. And also, I think, again, it shouldn't be within the power of the city attorney, I think is my way of answering the question.
Thanks. Yeah, Heidi has been very challenging for us to navigate. She doesn't like me personally because I came to the Pico Neighborhood Council when she was on it and advocated for a protected bike lane on San Vicente, which she was very opposed to. She was against HLA. Early in her tenure, there was a video of her rallying against Vision Zero. She called it Zero Vision, ironically, saying that we should get rid of Vision Zero because it's being cited in lawsuits when people are get into trouble and die or injured in crashes, versus like trying to solve the problem of people dying in the street. So it's been frustrating. It's also expensive. The city budgeted $100 million this year for liability. I'm sorry, $100 million for liability claims last fiscal year. Mm-hmm. And it expects to pay out over 320 million. So it's 220 million over budget. This year, it's estimated the city will spend $71 million settling with people that have been hurt in our streets, which amazingly is more than the budget of Vision Zero. So in other words, we're spending more to pay victims of people hurt in the street than we are to try to solve the problem. I know the city attorney doesn't have policy-making ability, but wanted to get your thoughts on these insane liability payouts and what can be done about it.
Yeah, so just to kind of give everybody like a kind of a historic perspective, City Council for about the past 8 years has budgeted around like 87 to 90 million for liability payouts. That was something that Mike Fewer, who was Heidi's predecessor, would regularly exceed by around 9 to 36 million. In her first year, Heidi exceeded it by 100 million. In her second year, 200 million, and then on track now, 230 million. And that kind of explosion in the cost is just unprecedented. And it's something that, if I'm being really, really just frank, because the city attorney has blocked the controller from really accessing a lot of data. It's hard to really like tease out what all of the causes are. What I think I have been able to find, we've had outside counsel costs explode about 450%. And that comes from a couple, and the way that impacts liability is in a couple of ways. One, obviously, it's instead of paying the taxpayer-funded deputy city attorneys who are experts in municipal litigation, it farms it out to outside counsel. Some of the rates that have been negotiated are like $1,900 an hour. And so you've got much more expensive counsel doing the job that we already pay deputy city attorneys to do. But then also, because they bill by the hour, they're often incentivized to resolve things in the most expensive ways. And I think this is kind of where also you have a city attorney who I mentioned has never been a litigator. And I know that might kind of sound like very legalese, but it's important here because choosing an attorney, it's kind of like choosing a doctor. Of like, you've got brain cancer. Would you go to an orthopedic surgeon who's maybe had many years of experience, but in knee replacement surgery, or would you go to a brain surgeon who does the brain surgery every day? Law is very similar. It's very hard if you've just been like reviewing contracts and working for big banks and doing bankruptcy, then you don't know how to really judge the value of a lawsuit, judge when you need to settle, judge when you can take something to trial. Those are really skills that are litigation skills. And I think as we've been seeing kind of this shift to outside counsel, we've been seeing people flee from the office, flee for retaliation, flee because claims of their emails being surveilled. So all of this kind of adds up and comes a climate where you have a city workforce that is very, very experienced and very capable, but not being trusted or relied on, and instead being kind of driven out. And at the same time, this litigation is getting farmed to a lot of outside counsel that doesn't have that same depth of experience, that is incentivized to make things more expensive, and then a city attorney who doesn't necessarily have the background and experience to kind of be able to check and judge that. I think this is all a part of the problem. Until we kind of have more transparency from the city attorney's office, it's really hard to diagnose all of the issues. But that's one thing I've been observing, and one thing when I've spoken to both deputies within the office, as well as I've been talking to a lot of people who litigate against the office, because I want to hear from the people who are litigating, like what is going on, because we've never seen this before, and that's kind of the story and narrative they've been sharing as well. I think that's a piece of it. Again, I don't think it explains all of it. The other piece that I think is really tied to kind of the transportation and the infrastructure issues we've been talking about is I don't think the city attorney's office invests enough on the compliance side. We see these issues keep coming up again and again and again in different departments. We see the lack of investment in infrastructure and street repair causing more and more liability. There was a situation last year where a street lamp fell on someone's head and disabled them for life. And it was a $20 million settlement. And that person absolutely deserved recovery, because no one would want to be disabled for life for $20 million. There's no value you can place on losing that. But I guarantee you fixing the street lamp would have cost a lot less. And one of the things that I really want to work on, hopefully with the controller's office, is what I'm kind of thinking of as a liability audit that really goes into all of our lawsuits over the past, 2 years, 5 years, and tries to see where have we seen repeat issues, either repeat failures or lack of protocol, so we can implement that and make sure our cities are coming into compliance with federal, state, and local law. But then also starting to quantify, I think, for the city, even though the city attorney doesn't do budget advocacy and doesn't have a vote, I think it would be very helpful to paint a picture for council when you're not spending X on achieving Vision Zero, when you're not spending on achieving, pursuing street repairs, it will cost 10 times more in lawsuits. So in the long term, it will be much more expensive. So I think when I think about the budget and where we are, what I can say definitively is this is unprecedented. I think that there are things that we can do to try to get this back to where it was when we had a city attorney who kind of to previous administrations, but I think we need to do more. And I think we particularly need to do more on the compliance side to make sure that the city isn't sued for the same thing more than once. And that we are really, really thinking about this in terms of investing in long-term, infrastructure repairs and municipal services, because that is the best way, frankly, to solve our liability crisis.
Thank you. Over to Josh.
Great, thank you. Again, a topic we've kind of touched on, but want to ask more specifically about Measure HLA. As you know, Measure HLA passed last year with about 2/3 of Angelenos supporting it and saying yes to safer streets in the city. It's been more than a year since the election, and the city really has yet to start implementing almost anything. We're hearing that a draft implementation ordinance is unlikely to be adopted until August, nearly a year and a half after the election. And currently the city departments have no official guidance for what to do or how to follow it. And as a result, the city keeps implementing projects that might lead to lawsuits. They're implementing things without actual direction from the city. There's the first HLA lawsuit was filed last month over Vermont Avenue. The city attorney's office is very busy and the city gets sued all the time. But under a Marissa Roy administration, how do you think things like HLA might be prioritized? Would it be the same given how busy the office is?
Listen, the office is busy, but these delays and months of delays are also not something, I'll just say, not something that I saw when I worked there under a previous administration. I think that there are choices that are being made that are delaying certain ordinances. And it seems like because of animus toward those measures. What I can say is that it is so counterproductive when you think about limiting liability to delay the implementation of Healthy Streets LA, because there are so many unavoidable deaths that take place when we are not engaging in these projects. There are so many avoidable lawsuits when we are not giving, because we could be giving guidance. And that's what the departments rely on the city attorney to do, is to give that guidance. A lot of the city attorneys have described being held back from working with departments on some of these compliance issues. And so I think that a large part of what I would want to do is just think about this in terms of making sure we're reducing liability for the future, and making sure we have also, I think, reasonable deadlines, for not just Healthy Streets LA, but for all ordinances. I've also spoken with council members and other, in New York, they have an Office of Legislative Counsel that directly works with council for drafting ordinances, looking at models like that to make our ordinance drafting system cleaner, closer to council's vision and purpose, and make sure that it's less politicized, frankly. And so I would like to adopt models like that to put some real deadlines on the city attorneys drafting of ordinances, so that they're not being held up and that we're not seeing, discretion abused. And I think also making sure that the city attorney's office is a lot more involved with the departments on giving advice and compliance, so that later it doesn't come back in lawsuits. I look at the Linton lawsuit, and it's so unfortunate, because the city should have just been doing this work. I think the best, an attorney obviously their job is to defend the city, but I think the best attorney prevents their city from being sued in the first place. And that is very much the approach that I would take, is much more proactive, not delaying, not hiding the ball, not trying to make things more difficult, but actually trying to proactively engage in the compliance, give as much guidance to departments as possible, be embedded with departments so that they have relationships with the city attorney's office. and make sure that there are very firm and followed deadlines for issuing, implementing regulations and ordinances.
Thank you. Last question before we go to the audience. How's the race going? Who else are you up against? Is it just Heidi? How are you feeling about your chances? And what's your campaign strategy to get through to voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right now it's just me and Heidi, and I think that we've had a lot of good successes so far. On day one, we announced just several electeds: Ulises Hernandez, Isabel Jurado, Lindsay Horvath, Tina McKinner, and Lola Smallwood Cuevas at the state, and Shadea Hawari and Caroline Menjivar at the state as well. We've surpassed $100,000, which is one of like the big viability tests that people have. And I just actually today posted UTLA's endorsement, so starting to see some good reception, which is great. And I think that the number one thing that I have noticed on the campaign trail I'm building a very grassroots campaign, is just that the contrast between me and Heidi sort of speaks for itself. Someone who has not been involved in any of the Trump lawsuits and has refused to get involved on behalf of the city of LA, someone who, has been part of over a dozen legal actions against Trump, someone who has not brought a single tenant harassment case, someone who's working on tenant harassment investigations right now. I think you could not, someone who spent her career kind of building up big banks and doing bankruptcy and things for billion-dollar contracts for billion-dollar companies, and someone who sues companies on behalf of cities and counties and states or state. I think that contrast has really gotten through to people, and a lot of my campaign and path to victory is in drawing that contrast, which I don't have to work too hard to draw. I think we both draw it, and really helping to people understand how much more this office could be doing for them. I think one thing I really admired about the 2022 controller race was how much Controller Mejia educated people about what the controller's office could do and got people excited about audits. I personally think lawsuits are cooler than audits, but a little biased. I am really excited to reach people about a position they might not have thought about, and really, I think, show them how it can be something that works in the public interest. And I think the great thing is that you're really only going to hear one candidate bringing that message. So I kind of look forward to drawing that contrast, very much rooted, I think, in my experience and receipts. Everything I'm saying that the city attorney's office can do are things that I have done throughout my career, which is great because I think our current city attorney loves to talk about how this is not the way it's done, or the client of the city attorney isn't the people, and that's flat out wrong. And I can point you to the statute that would say it's wrong. And I think that being able to kind of contrast we can't do this versus not only can we, but I have, is going to be part of really communicating that message, and making the case to Los Angeles of why we need a new city attorney.
Thank you. All right, so let's go to some audience questions. The first question is, and I think you touched on this a bit, but it sounds like perhaps there's broken collaboration between the controller and the city attorney. And there does seem to be very close collaboration between the city attorney and the mayor. So within the context of what the city attorney's office can do, the question is, what sort of actions would you take to make the street safer for pedestrians and cyclists?
I think that the city attorney should be close with all of the departments, all of the council offices, the mayor. I think there's a role for the interaction between the city controller, the city attorney, and the mayor to work a lot more smoothly so that we are really uplifting transportation issues. I mentioned this liability audit I want to work on. One of the big things I want to quantify in that, because I just think that it's a perspective we haven't heard in budget hearings. We often kind of see the budget, laid out, all the positions, and not really a lot of thinking about the long-term impact, just kind of like descriptions of like it takes 9 months for a street lamp to be repaired, and that's very abstract, and we don't get to see the consequences of that. I think a huge part of that is letting the city controller into the city attorney's office to be able to really examine the impact of when we aren't doing this infrastructure work, these street repairs, street lamp repairs, and kind of the impact on liability. And I think that, you know, the city attorney has the ability to deny the city controller access to their books, and she has exercised that. I am not afraid of transparency because I think information is power. And I, of course, you have to make sure you're only releasing the public information, of course, and abide by attorney-client privilege. But there's a lot of public information that auditors could analyze to help us answer some of these questions of when you're not filling 2 vacant positions and it takes 9 months to repair a street lamp with this many street lamps that need repaired, what does that look like in terms of our litigation risks, and what does that look like in terms of our liability costs in 10 years? I would love that question to be answered. I would love that question to be answered for street lamps, for street repairs, for sidewalk repairs, for failure to implement bike lanes, for failure to implement the mobility plan when we're doing repaving. I think quantifying it will kind of get past any disagreements that people might have about whether we should be doing this, because we can assign a hard number to it in terms of what this is costing us when we're out of compliance and when we're risking people's lives, livelihoods, and safety by not doing this work, what it actually also costs the city. And so I think that's a really big data point that I want to bring. And I think that that collaboration with the city controller's office will also allow the city attorneys to give more pertinent information to the mayor as the mayor is drafting a budget, so that she's taking into consideration not just kind of the state of affairs as they are right now, but what it looks like for the next 5-10 years.
Thanks. Next question. There's been a lot of corruption in city council in recent years, disgraced council members. I don't know if this is in the realm of the city attorney, but the question is, how could the city attorney impact city accountability?
I think there are a lot of ways that the city attorney could impact city accountability. I think that the city attorney, as I mentioned, can have a role to play in compliance, which is just basically the act of making sure that people are following all applicable state, federal, and local laws. It sounds very jargony, but it's really important work. I think that we saw the recent, as an example, like GChat scandal of disappearing messages and compliance with, certain like compliance with preserving records for the CPRA. That's something where there wasn't a policy that was issued. And when you have the absence of guidance from the city attorney's office, it means that there can be potential liabilities that spring up everywhere. I think the city attorney's office needs to be much more involved and proactive about issue spotting and making sure that we're not kind of just turning a blind eye and waiting for the lawsuit to come, but really involved in making sure that there are protocols in place so that city departments are up to standard and following and getting the guidance, particularly whenever laws change and there needs to be new guidance. The city attorney's office should be really involved in giving that kind of proactive guidance and advice to the departments, to city council. And I think that it might kind of sound small and ministerial, but it's really important so that this gray area and the lack of advice doesn't kind of lead to people making up their own rules.
Well, speaking of making up our own rules, next question. The city council has made unlawful decisions that were unlawful under state housing law. For example, in CD3, ED1 projects were vested, and yet council voted to deny these 100% affordable housing projects. Can you speak to how you'll work with the city council on housing law and make sure they follow state law?
I mean, I think that the city attorney, again, I'm sorry to keep using the word compliance, but I think the city attorney needs to take a very proactive role in making sure that our city council members understand the legal risks of their actions, particularly when you've got things that are vested and there might be reliance rights, contractual rights, issues with state laws. You can't just disregard state law if you disagree with it. And so making sure that the city attorney is giving actually principled advice to the city council. And I think that unfortunately, we've had a city attorney who disagrees with a lot of state housing laws, who openly said she believes that, you know, SB 9 and 10, which was housing near transit, was unconstitutional. It's like, you may think that, but that is the law. And until a court has struck it down, you need to be advising the council accordingly. So I think that we need to be making sure that the city attorney's advice is not tinged by political viewpoint, and is sincerely advising on the risks, and is kind of part of that process. I think also I had mentioned kind of an Office of Legislative Counsel. I think that that city council needs additional, and I think a lot of city council members are also kind of hungry for that, to have additional attorneys and counsel that they can ask some of these questions and work with the city attorney's office so that we're advising also earlier and making sure that they are getting the comprehensive advice they need. But I think that a key point of this is making sure that you're not inserting your own political judgment into advice, but are really just relaying what compliance with state law looks like.
Okay, a couple last questions, and we actually have someone from Heidi's office asking all sorts of questions, and I think some of them are perhaps more aggressive than they need to be, but I do think they're interesting, and I'm going to ask you a couple of them. Question about resources. Does the city attorney lack the capacity to take on corporations that have very large resources versus, for example, the attorney general's office? The question was, are you selling something you can't deliver based on the resources we have?
No, because that was the type of work that I did when I was there. And I think that I would never insult the deputies at the city attorney's office. They were some of the smartest people I have ever worked with. And here's the fun thing actually about that kind of affirmative litigation. When you file litigation under its California Business and Professions Code 17200, where you can sue any business for anything unlawful, unfair, or deceptive, whenever you win, you not only get the restitution for the victim, so kind of the recovery that they are owed, you get mandatory civil penalties that can only be used for future consumer protection work. Mike Fewer, talking about the city attorney's office not having resources to take on big companies, he took on Wells Fargo before the attorney general's office did, and won back $50 million, $25 million of which was to be allocated to the city attorney's office for future consumer protection work. That fund has unfortunately since expired. But that was the type of work when you had a city attorney willing to be brave. The attorney general's office has built up this capacity over many years, but I see San Francisco, which is a smaller city and a city attorney's office of half the size, taking on these companies, taking on the Trump administration, and more than able to handle it. So I will never discount or insult the attorneys in the city attorney's office. They are extraordinarily capable. They also, because of this fee structure, as we start engaging in more of this work, it becomes more self-funding. So in San Francisco, David Chu started a housing justice unit that would use this law to go after abusive landlords and to do tenants' rights work. He started with a small grant from the state that was, I think, like around $1 million. It funded 2 attorneys. And because they were winning and because they were getting these mandatory civil penalties, it's now grown to 13 attorneys doing this work. So there are models from our own state where we've had city attorneys invest in this work and do this work alongside the attorney general. I think that the kind of role for the city attorneys and the attorney general is the attorney general. You think about kind of cases that have statewide import, that cross county lines. And that's really a great place for the attorney general to be involved. But we're the largest city in the state. There are so many, there are wage theft cases, there are abusive landlords that kind of only are within the jurisdiction of the city and might not cross the city lines or have the sort of, cross county jurisdictional issues that would bring the attorney general in. And just because those are happening within the city doesn't mean they should be ignored. I think that the city attorney's office could really become the largest public interest law office in the city. And I really believe in its ability to do so. And I know that it was on that path, 8 years ago. And it's time for us to kind of rise to meet our peer cities like San Diego, Santa Clara County, and San Francisco.
last question. I know we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Just question, we've talked a lot about the civil side of the city attorney's office. There's also a criminal side, right? Misdemeanors in the city of LA. How do you see that balance? Would you lean more or less into that, or would kind of be status quo on the criminal side?
Yeah, so the criminal side of the office, the city attorney has jurisdiction over misdemeanors in the city of LA. It's about 1/3 of the work of the office. Misdemeanors are generally kind of what are seen as the more petty offenses. The majority of them are nonviolent. And I think that the we've seen city attorneys across the country. I think particularly a great example is in Baltimore, that really look at this misdemeanor jurisdiction as an opportunity for diversion, an opportunity to break cycles of criminalization. Because when we think about public safety, at least what I'm focused on, is public safety strategy being effective. And for me, the North Star is reducing recidivism, which is where you're reducing any chances of reoffending. And diversion for nonviolent offenses is one of the most effective strategies. If you can get someone the mental health intervention they need, addiction services they need, then you can help get them back on a path that serves the whole community, that helps the individual. And there were a lot of diversion programs that had been in the office. And as I mentioned, there were neighborhood prosecutors. A lot of that has been pulled back. The current city attorney ended the neighborhood prosecutor program, ended a lot of specialized units like the family violence unit that focused on domestic violence and trauma-informed care. And it kind of meant that all of that work sort of became general purpose and a little bit less tailored. I think that a lot of what I would like to see, I think that the deputies, one of the things that I kind of love working in a public law office is that the focus is on problem solving. The focus is not just like a win for a win's sake. It should be on problem solving and metrics of real public safety. And so I think for me, looking at diversion so that we are reducing recidivism, looking at how we bring kind of trauma-informed approaches, that is really kind of what I want to bring to the city attorney's, bring back, I should say, to the city attorney's office, as well as kind of the neighborhood focus, making sure that, the neighborhood prosecutor program, there were these 2 deputies, I think in particular, who used to be at the schools. And they would do they were like this almost general counsel roles. They'd point out when there was like toxic dumping that was impacting a school, but they'd also point out when there was a broken street lamp and they needed to help expedite that. And I think that that had such a positive impact and gave people a direct line from the neighborhood to the city attorney's office. And so that is much more of the approach that I would like to bring back, is something that focuses on the real metrics, really gets creative in integrating diversion so that we're breaking cycles of criminalization in ways that are cost effective and also compassionate, and then bringing back a neighborhood focus to that side of the criminal work. And I think that it allows then our civil side to kind of focus on the worst bad actors in the cities, the people who are stealing, again, $2.5 billion in wages every year, the abusive landlords who are driving our eviction to homelessness pipeline. And so I think that this is all kind of about making sure this office is working in every single facet in the public interest.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's. Any final words you'd like to leave us with before we adjourn?
No, just know that I'm going to leave my email in the chat because I think there were some questions that didn't get answered. But I really hope that you engage with the campaign. You can engage via social media or my website. And also that this kind of excites you about the potential of this office because there's so much good that it can do. And I am really excited to kind of get to work with you to make sure that we realize that.
Well, thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck in your campaign, and we'll be watching closely. And thank you everybody for your time, and have a good evening.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you, Marissa.